Nights in Tight Spaces is a bold sequel that not only meaningfully adds and alters the gameplay, but completely changes the visual identity. Most sequels opt for a safer approach, building slightly on the existing brand and core systems that people have become familiar with. Against all odds, Nights in Tight Spaces is a far superior game to the original, and somehow the experience also manages to be unique, but still remains familiar for better or worse. Nights in Tight Spaces is a grid-based deck builder that focuses on the same close-quarter turn-based tactical combat of the original. Stories aren't typically a main driver for a deck builder, but it was nice that both games are tied together by the thread of the top-secret organization, Section 11, but this time, you find yourself leading a group of misfits in a plot to save the kingdom against Cataclysm thanks to your unique skill set. The story has a refreshing interactivity to it as you have the ability to dictate how certain events unfold. Runs don't always play out the same, and if you win certain fights or ask the right questions, future paths will be different. The core mechanics established in Fights in Tight Spaces returns, but when it comes to the differences, 4 elevate the experience to something much greater than before by adding in a lot more variety and new layers of strategy. The new visual overhaul, the character classes, an equipment system, and the ability to recruit mercenaries. In Nights in Tight Spaces, although the isometric style returns, there is a completely new and at times stunning art style that uses a form of stylized hatching, but still manages to remain true to the IP. This new art style adds a much needed sense of variety when moving from stage to stage. In Fights in Tight Spaces, there was one character you basically played as John Wick, but now there is a class archetype system that have meaningful differences. There are the more melee-focused classes, including the fighter as well as the brawler. There's the range classes, including the hunter as well as the rogue. And finally, you have magic classes, including the cleric as well as the sorcerer. What's really nice is that when you begin, 3 of the classes are already unlocked, which means that you can find the one that suits your playstyle immediately without having to grind just to discover your skills are incompatible with a certain class. Similar to most deck builders, there are places to stop along your journey. There's a tavern to recruit members, the blacksmith for equipment, and a merchant where you can buy and upgrade cards, of which there are over 300. Groundshatter started to dabble with weapons in the DLC for Fights in Tight Spaces, but have now fully embraced the equipment system this time around, as you can wield an arsenal of weapons, equipment, and special items. Melee weapons, range weapons, shields, and more. There are also tiers of equipment that will have different perks such as inflicting bleed or poison. The final new addition is the ability to recruit mercenaries to your party, assuming that you have the gold to do so, and they don't come cheap, especially the farther you progress in the game. You can have up to 3 people on your team at once, and in addition to what class, you can also control their equipment. When you factor in what class you can hire, the equipment that they will use, and harnessing their support attacks that happen without action points if positioned properly, the addition of a party greatly increases the strategy of the franchise. Despite being a noticeable improvement over the original, there are still some new issues that have arisen and some lingering ones that still exist. One of the best new features was the equipment system, but after making it through a few acts, stopping at some vendors, and completing side quests, you have an inventory full of equipment that is no longer relevant. It would have been great if you had the ability to sell some of your old equipment for a reduced value and make some gold in that way. Nights in Tight Spaces showcases some impressive visuals anchored by a strong art direction, but just like Fights in Tight Spaces, repetition can still be an issue. The story takes place over different acts across different kingdoms, yet no matter what land you were in, you would always end up in the same looking bathroom or farm. It would have been great if there were a few more stages, or if they had a slightly different look depending on which kingdom you were in. A few more character models also would have been a great feature. For example, if you are a brawler and you hire a brawler at the tavern, you will both look the same on the battlefield, and this can be a little confusing on who is who when there is only one character model per class. Nights in Tight Spaces greatly improved the variety and strategy with the addition of all of the new features, but when traveling on your map and deciding which path to take, the choices were often too similar. Some of the best games in the genre offer vastly different choices, which gives the player more autonomy on their journey and allows them to decide if they want a harder challenge now or later. Nights in Tight Spaces adds plenty of variety and strategy to the already solid turn-based tactical gameplay of Fights in Tight Spaces. Repetition can still be an issue for the franchise, and a few quality of life changes would go a very long way in providing a more well-rounded experience. But with a massive visual overhaul, great performance on Steam Deck, and many major gameplay changes, Nights in Tight Spaces now positions the franchise in the upper echelons of deck builders. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe and find a lot more like it. Video games is a positivity-first gaming outlet. We believe that gaming should be a force for good. We focus on making uplifting content with constructive discussions and celebrating what makes games great. That's all for today, and until next time, be good to your fellow gamer, but more importantly, be better to your fellow human.